Okay, tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai haere mai ki te hui o te komiti rātonga rangotopu me te rōtaki. E tēnei rā, welcome everybody to today's Policy, Finance and Strategy Committee meeting. Emergency procedures, we're all well aware of, hopefully in the room, but I'll just get them popped up briefly. A reminder of what to do. Hopefully everyone's feeling healthy and knows what to do in the case of emergency, and please can you check that your mobile phones are switched to silent. And I'll ask for the opening formalities, the karakia timatanga, to be shown on the screen. Me karakia tātou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hia ki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei, Māori ora. That moves us into apologies. I've received no apologies other than Councillor Morgan may have to leave before the end of the meeting, depending on how we go for time. There are no other apologies. I don't think we need to move an early departure. Just note that one. Thank you very much. And public comment. I think we have no public comment at this stage in the meeting, but just to note that we will have a public comment in the excluded paper for today's meeting, and that person will be joining us at the appropriate time. Item number 4, conflict of interest declarations. I call on members to declare any conflicts of interest they have in relation to items on the agenda. Are there any conflicts of interest? Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you. Just under item, what is it, 2? The heritage buildings. I live in a heritage street.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item number 5, the first of our papers. That's the recommendation to Council, Hutt City Council, 25th July 2024, approval to consult on the control of alcohol in public places bylaw. It's on page 9 of the agenda, and I'll invite Angela Gordon, Senior Policy Advisor, to speak to the paper, and Dean as well. Kia ora.
Good afternoon. So yes, we are here to seek your approval to for the public consultation for this bylaw, and there are 2 purposes that we have put forward: to reinstate the control of alcohol in public places bylaw as per the previous one, and to get approval for the public consultation for the new one. General feedback so far is that the alcohol-free zones from the previous bylaw are adequate, but we are proposing 2 minor changes. We're extending the CBD to include an area around Cornwall Street, Railroad Road, and Pretoria Street, and that is shown on alcohol-free zone number 12 in the statement of proposal, and to include a new street in the Queen Street area in Wainuiomata due to updates in the urban design since the previous bylaw, and that is shown in alcohol-free zone number 10 in the statement of proposal. The other new bit that we're proposing in the new bylaw is a new pathway for establishing temporary alcohol-free zones when time does not allow for a council resolution. And this would entail the CE, when in consultation with the mayor and committee chairs, to be able to impose a temporary alcohol-free zone when this time is not available. And I'm here for questions and comments.
Thank you, Councillor Parkin.
Kia ora. Thank you for the report. The question I have is probably buried in the paperwork somewhere, but it's take a hypothetical situation. Somebody purchases alcohol at an off license and then has to travel home through one of these alcohol-free areas. How does that affect them, and how does this bylaw interact with that?
The alcohol-free zone people are allowed to transport alcohol through alcohol-free zones. Yeah, I don't think I need to say more than that.
Councillor Edwards.
I had a couple of questions, one out of curiosity and the other one a question about one of the maps. The curiosity question is why has the old bylaw been revoked rather than just, lapsing because it's out of date or being renewed because we want to change it? Why has the bylaw been revoked?
Your mic's off.
Sorry, I think it's just an automatic process. The bylaw was a new bylaw at the time, therefore it had a 5-year lifespan. It remains in force for another 2 years if it hasn't been renewed before the end of those 5 years. It wasn't renewed, so we were in the 2-year period. Again, it wasn't renewed, and so it was just automatic.
And, I can see the logic of the proposed alcohol-free zone right along the Petone foreshore and parts of Petone, and also in the Corner Street industrial area, I presume picking up boy racer activity that occurs there sometimes, but not on the far western end of the foreshore in the Korokoro Gateway area, which is, there's car parking and people definitely congregate there, and I was just wondering why that area is left out.
Left out from the previous, but was included in the previous one?
Sorry,
Okay.
Councillor Edwards, can you use your mic too?
I didn't check the previous maps to see whether it was previously, but it's certainly not in what we're proposing today.
The alcohol-free zones that we have proposed today are those that were in the previous bylaw. And in putting this paper together for you, we did engage with a number of key stakeholders, one of them being the police, as they enforce this bylaw. And they did not raise any areas that they felt needed to be included over and above what we already have.
Thank you. I had a question about a couple of areas. They're included in the second appendix, and I don't know if the second appendix is intended as a paper to go out to the public. No, thank you for the clarity on that. But yeah, just to clarify officers' positions on those. Those are 2 areas not identified currently as alcohol-free zones. There's some discussion there about the status of those 2 areas, and then recommendations, potential to consider a cap for off licenses in this area. I think that's the same for both of them. So officers' recommendation is not to pursue an alcohol-free zone, but perhaps to look at a cap through the local alcohol policy.
The evidential test for an alcohol-free zone is quite high, and there has to be demonstrated levels of alcohol-related crime and disorder. And where there is some, the police did not recommend any specific recommendations for alcohol-free zones. However, the public health data did indicate that perhaps a cap could be considered.
Councillor Parkin.
Just wondering if it would be appropriate to directly ask police about that area that's Councillor Edwards has pointed out on Petone foreshore. It does seem like an omission. I've just checked the current maps. It is currently missing from the current maps, but given the other areas that we're expanding it into, it seems to make sense. At least it's worth asking the police if it is an issue.
We are targeting engagement, so it would be very easy for us to add that to our engagement to police, or consulting, I should say.
Councillor Dyer.
Thank you. Do the police have to have issues with an area for us to make it a bylaw area? Like, is that one of the requirements for imposing an area?
Well, the police are the ones that are most privy to the problem areas. And if they don't see an area as having any particular issues, it's kind of difficult for us to prove that we need an alcohol-free zone if there are no enforcement issues.
Like, I'm thinking around the Petone West one, that's been fenced off for the last 2-3 years. So they'll say, we've had no issues for the last 2 or 3 years, but we know prior to that it was an issue. And if all the rest of Petone is mapped off and there's one car park that's got a nice new building, a nice new lighting and seating, I can see that becoming an area where people know that's the one area in Petone you can go to. And obviously there wouldn't have been any issues previously if we asked the police. But there was some wording there has to be details of a high level of crime. So I was wondering, is that actually like a requirement that it has to hit a certain threshold before we're allowed to impose an area?
Yeah, the legislation is written a bit difficult to meet. When you're first implementing an alcohol-free zone, you might be able to meet those thresholds because you've identified some areas that needed an alcohol-free zone. And we're 6 years into ours, and we can argue that the alcohol-free zones are working because it's no longer an issue here, but these were areas that were indicated by police 6 years ago. So because there's a lack of evidence of that high rate of crime, we can say that if we remove them, we might be going backwards and going back to that period 6 years ago where we needed these alcohol-free zones then.
Councillor Parkin, I think, has another question.
Yeah, just a further thought on that area in Petone. Are we also consulting with Mana Whenua, given they've got new buildings there? Yeah.
Okay, are there any further questions? Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, I had one on the Wainuiomata map. I'm just bringing it up, sorry, to get the page number. I think it's 35. Yeah, page 35. It's got quite a big area that I think is now housing, like private residential houses. Yeah, just wondering why we'd have a bylaw over a private residential area.
The bylaw will only cover public places. It won't actually apply to the residential properties themselves.
So just the streets outside their houses.
That's correct, yeah, public places.
And this is a development that's sort of just opened now. What would be the reason for, if it needs to hit a high threshold of crime in the area, and these houses, I think, have only just been built in the last year? Is there bad issues there that we'd need to include it, or is this a sort of hangover from when it used to be, whatever it was prior to what it is now?
I think I had specific comment from the police report that said that this should remain in place, given the activity that they're dealing with.
Okay. And then a question around the Te Ata, page 35. I don't know the area super well, so that's why I thought I'd just question it. And then the inclusion of Te Ata Raukura, obviously a great addition to that. Why would we not include sort of the bits around it as well, the Countdown car park, that area, or is this really only public areas? Yeah. Okay. And then I had another question. Yeah, I had a conversation with the Waterloo bottle shop who said, why isn't this a public banned area? So they've got concerns with drinking there, so I'm intrigued to see that we're not proposing to include Waterloo. Petone West was the other one I thought we probably should include. Harcourt Wherry Drive, there's obviously a lot of known issues there nearly every single night with boy racer activity, which is why we did the Corner Street one 6 years ago. It's kind of helped stop the area there. There's also down Tunnel Gully, that area. Those areas are bigger issues, but alcohol does contribute to there, and it gives the police another tool when they are turning up. I frequent both those areas regularly, and there are always glass and bottles all over the floor, so people are drinking there. Yeah, so they were the two that I thought would be worth including, and I had the same thoughts about the recommendation is to put a cap on it. Obviously, the public bylaw can't impose caps. That's a separate policy going through a different committee. Yeah, I just don't know if having a cap on the area would get rid of the, like Waterloo, putting a cap there when there's already 2 bottle shops. It's not going to fix the issue by putting a cap saying you can't have any more. People are still drinking out in that square and in and around the shops.
Yeah, it all comes back to the lack of evidence that the police just don't have for those areas. Even though the community might have experienced some problems, it doesn't meet that high threshold that's required. This is why they haven't recommended any other alcohol-free zones than what we have.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we'll just also add to that, I think, noting Angela's point that obviously in putting the maps together in the draft bylaw for consultation, the evidence base is a really critical part of that, so we need to make sure it's defensible in terms of the public engagement. However, it's going to be really important that evidence that comes through in public engagement, so for example, there may be lots of comment and feedback from people in particular areas, or giving feedback that there may be additional areas to be included, and that's something that the in terms of making the decision may be reflected on when we're considering finalising the bylaw. The other point to note is that obviously the situation across Lower Hutt will change over time, and so that's why the bylaw review process is going to be really critical, or where there is going to be a need, if there's an emerging situation, to review the bylaw and make amendments to the maps or areas included if there is an evidence base to suggest that change is needed. So this isn't necessarily a one and done. It can be changed in the future, consulted on and adapted to future and emerging needs. So it isn't the only opportunity to make sure we're predicting all of those issues going forward.
Just going to Councillor Dyer's page 35, I mean, it honestly doesn't make sense. It feels like this hasn't been updated. All of that area, which was Hugh Sinclair Park, is all now privately owned, so it should be taken out, I assume. I mean, why would we just keep the map as it is when that's all now sold off? It's not a reserve. It's not. So you would just remove that, can't be applied to it anyway. I think it just confuses people. And then also, I mean, the map itself is severely old with all that residential area that Councillor Dyer's done. So it does feel like this has kind of just been copied and pasted, and we've just added in Te Arokoura. So like just trying to understand what lens has actually been put over, like critical lens has been put over this in preparation of the map.
It was primarily the police report that they provided to us asking that we keep the alcohol-free zones as is.
Yeah, but you can't, I mean, why would we keep a zone in what's now a privately owned? It's not a park anymore. We need to update this map to actually reflect reality. Otherwise, I think we're just going to confuse people when they look at this. Yeah, and I suppose if there are any others that are in the similar boat, the same should happen.
Thank you. Can I have some comment, please, on attachment 2, page 55 for Moira, where we have had incidences there before, not necessarily alcohol-based, but they sort of stemmed from that activity. And if you're saying the police give the feedback here, yeah, if you've got any more information around this, because it says their recommendations to a potential cap for this off-licence area, and that would be my request as we include Moira, just because, yeah, first of all, your comment, yeah.
The recommendation for the cap has come from public health. And I know that it doesn't relate to the bylaw, it does relate to the local alcohol policy. But because we are actually looking at 3 alcohol elements at the same time, it provided an opportunity to kind of have a broad look at how these things work together. And that's what I attempted to do here. So yes, that was a public health recommendation.
So we can include that in this bylaw, put it in for consultation now?
For the cap, that would be part of the local alcohol policy.
Yeah, and we have been really clear from the beginning of this process that there's a bit of an overlap here, and that the right comments need to go to the right places, but also an endeavour from our officers to pull those comments into the right places. So I think if someone submits on this and says we want a cap, then it feeds into the other discussion, right? Okay. I'll pass over to Mr. Cato down the back there.
I was just going to add one comment. I'm not sure if it's been picked up, but there's basically a citywide ban from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., which was the position we had previously. So a lot of these problem areas, and what the police kind of presented last time this happened was, you know, the problems start happening after about 9 p.m. at night. So so there's some 24-hour bans around the main towns where people do drink during the day, but a lot of these problem areas when people congregate at night, kind of after 9 p.m. So they'll be captured by that citywide ban. I won't comment too much on whether the citywide ban met the criteria in the Act, but that was addressed last time and can be again.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments? Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, just want to clarify that. So you're saying anywhere in the city after 9 o'clock, current or under the old bylaw was banned?
That's correct, yeah. And if you look at, I was looking at the old, I think it's page 40. It pretty much has a 40 of diligent. If you're on diligent, it basically has a orange line around the entire city. With some exceptions, so not Western Hills. And there were reasons for that at the time.
It's changed a lot up there on the hills since back then.
So then why do we need to include zones 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that are just 9 till 5 if they're included in the citywide ban?
Yeah, that's right. So the only individual maps there should be are for the 24-hour things. The rest is all captured, and if it's all captured within these areas, there are some areas that sit outside of that big citywide that need to have their own plans attached to them.
Okay, are there any further questions? I did just want to make a comment about the draft statement of proposal, and actually the other part of the proposal, the second part about the chief executive and the temporary alcohol-free zones, that throughout the statement of proposal, the language changes quite a bit, and I don't know if that's intentional or not, but just for some consistency and clarity about who is consulted on those particular decisions. I think it says mayor and chairs, mayor and committee chairs, mayor and elected members. It's a bit slippery in the language there.
Yes, that is correct. It should say in consultation with committee chairs, and I'll clean it up.
Thank you. And in particular on page 13 is questions to consider, and it only mentions the chief executive in that one there. So yeah, if you could just make that really clear to people. If there's no further questions, I'm going to move to the recommendations on page 8. There's a bunch of noting ones there, which I won't read out. The substantive ones are that the committee recommends to council that council agrees to include the following proposals in the draft bylaw for consultation. This is 4A, the alcohol-free zones and maps from the previous bylaw, with minor adjustments to reflect changes in town centres, and B, the ability of the chief executive in consultation with the mayor and committee chairs to authorise temporary alcohol-free zones in certain circumstances. And recommendation 5 agrees with the statement of proposal attached as Appendix 1. Now, there have been a few suggestions to the text there, but I think more substantially to the maps. So I'd like to ask that changes to the maps can come through mayor and chairs for final approval. Do we need to note that in the recommendation, or is that something that we can just expect from officers?
We can make it happen, don't worry.
Yeah, and I was going to say that I think that Wainuiomata map is the only one that is like severely out of date, just with rezoning and changes and the likes. But the others seem to be pretty accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. So if that one could just come through there for the final sign off. So I'm happy to move all of those recommendations. Mawai e tōtoko. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Brown. Is there any debate? Councillor Dyer and then Councillor Brown.
Yeah, obviously renewing a bylaw is a pretty significant part for a city. I can't help but think it feels like we've just taken the old one and kind of just tweaked a few things around the fringes rather than actually looking at the issues they're trying to stop happening in the first place. There's some areas I definitely think they should be included, but obviously they'll be picked up through the process of public consultation, because we will definitely hear from people in some of these problem areas. Yeah, the Wainuiomata map literally looks like it's just been copied and pasted without much thought into it. I'm a bit confused by some of the commentary from the police stuff. Every single suburb has used 18%, approximately 18% events recorded in Wainuiomata, but it's the same number for every single zone. To me, it just kind of sounds like, how can every single suburb have exactly the same percentage of alcohol-related harm, or alcohol being contributing towards it? Also, while it's useful having these numbers in here, it's good to hear that they're not going out for public consultation around the number of NIAs and CRDs. I'm assuming these numbers are for the whole suburb. So really having some problem areas, there is a disconnect between having public drinking in areas and there being wider issues in a suburb. So there is a bit of a disconnect. So the numbers are good to have in front of us, but I'm not reading into too much of the numbers because there is a bit of a gap between drinking in public and some of these issues which are in people's private homes. More than happy to support it as it is for now. Obviously, it's going out for public consultation alongside the other stuff. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what comes back to us. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you. This sits alongside the LAP, which will look at the off licences, and I'm at a broad level. This is public areas where there's troublesome problems from drinking, but that's often tied to the bottle stores that are there, the off licences that sell the cheap alcohol that target certain areas. So Wainuiomata has always been on its high haunches around keeping that cap there down to 6 because that causes a lot of problems. The map needs to get just adjusted, but it's quite built up in that area now too. But I think it needs to line up a little bit more to health as well, because they're the ones that seem to have the really tight numbers. They're more over, I think, the stats than the police have got the call outs, and they are the ones, but in the past we've always used health data to support the alcohol issues. So that will these two sort of line up together, that we need to line up the LAP at the same time. But I'm very supportive of having areas that are safe from public drinking, as well as keeping the alcohol licensing down. We had a lot of work in the past around alcohol and public meetings when there was a large Auckland-based bottle store coming into Wainuiomata, and what the public said, what the children said, the biggest problem that people have is all related to alcohol, and the police note that maybe that's something that lines up to our safety plan as well, because that's where the real issues are happening with addictions, and as Councillor Dyer said, in the home as well as in the public places.
Thank you. Any further comment? Mayor Barry.
Really showing my age that I can remember clearly the debate around this matter when it was last around the council table. I remember particular people around the table advocating for or against the 9 to 5 ban because they wanted to be able to transport their bottle of wine from house to house in the Western Hills. So there was some interesting debates at the time. But the reason I raised that is because actually, there was a lot of unease on that 9 to 5 restriction. And it is something that we sort of put our head out of the parapet on at the time. But I think that it's actually been a pretty major success in giving the police the discretion within reason to be able to deal with the majority of issues that happen around alcohol-related harm and drinking in public, which usually are happening in those evenings. So very, very supportive of that going out. And also what I would say in more recent times is let's not try and do a whole heap of work and focus on an area on something which actually isn't particularly broken. It has actually been working pretty well. So I wouldn't want us to be spending our focus and resources on this when we could be focusing on other things where there are more sort of pressing issues when we have to prioritise where we put our energy. But of course, understand we've got to go through this process now. Yep.
Thank you, Mayor Barry. Is there any further comment? No. In that case, I will now put the motion which has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Ka whakapua ki au, kua mana te mōtini, I declare the motion carried. And we'll move on now to item number 6, heritage buildings changes to financial assistance. We had a very good briefing on this the other day. Thank you, officers, but to welcome Sam White, Policy Advisor, and Nathan Geard, Policy Planning Manager, to speak to the report. Tēnā kōrua.
Kia ora, thank you. We are seeking agreement on the development of some new heritage conservation incentive tools. The heritage policy, for a bit of background, was approved by Council in 2021 with some goals to help retain, protect, enhance and conserve heritage in the city. When the policy was approved, Council asked for more advice on the proposed heritage conservation incentives and for this advice to align with the development of the district plan. So since then, 2 mechanisms have been operating, the Heritage Grant Fund, which has been consistently underspent, and the rates for emission for heritage buildings, which was used once during the period. But the other point here is that these things are primarily oriented towards built heritage and not completely fulfilling all of the policy's objectives. So the new tools that we're looking at developing criteria and plans for are a resource consent fee waiver for non-demolition consents, and alongside this some additional pre-application advice, and secondly detailed criteria and a plan to provide better support for sites and areas of cultural significance to better adhere to the policy's objectives. And the thinking is that any of these new mechanisms or others would be funded from the same allocation that the Heritage Grant comes from, which is at 150,000. So we, as you say, we did brief Council on the 4th of July, and some of the things we heard were that there was interest in maintaining some of the functions of the Heritage Grant Fund in some capacity, but that we should also improve coverage for all types of heritage as per the policy, and also report back on what other councils do. So just briefly, what we found from looking at a few different councils was that on specific issues like seismic reinforcing, some councils tend to direct more money towards that, like Wellington City Council, for example. Others like Auckland are more equitable with their coverage, and they just tend to cap each individual application. But we will continue to look at what is sort of best practice from other councils if you agree today that we go on and develop criteria for new incentive tools to better achieve the policy's objectives. So in terms of next steps, if agreed by PFS today, we'll go on to develop criteria and report back to PFS in November 2024 this year. Thank you. If you have any questions or comments.
Yes, thank you very much. He pātai tō ngā mema. Does any member have a question? Councillor Parker and then Councillor Dyer.
Kia ora, 2 questions. One, I asked officers at the briefing what the percentage increase due to our change was. I'm just wondering if you could reiterate that for general public information. And the other one was noting table 1, the numbers for the 2023 to 2024 year seem to be quite different from our briefing. Am I correct in that, or is that my dyslexia playing up?
I'll answer your first question. So just to clarify, it's the percentage increase from what's currently identified in the operative district plan versus where it looks like things are heading for the proposed district plan. So in the current district plan, there are 109 buildings identified, and in the draft district plan that we went out for consultation with last year, there were 218 buildings or structures. So on the face of it, that looks like it's a 100% increase in the number of buildings that have been identified in the draft compared to what's in the operative. However, some buildings in the operative district plan are only identified in heritage areas, not specific buildings themselves. So there are about 50 buildings that are in that circumstance. So it's around about 50 or 60 additional buildings that would be identified or that were identified in the draft district plan last year compared to what's identified in the operative district plan in some way.
To the second question, I think it's true to say that in 2022, there may have been outreach to heritage owners, and that's why it jumped up by a few. If I'm not misremembering, that's what one officer said. So that's why there would be a jump from 1 to 5.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Parker? And you were wondering if the dollar amounts in Table 1 were the same, is that right?
Sorry, the briefing was 104,000 rather than I think it was 60 on this page.
Sorry, I misunderstood you. That's because there has been two that have been ongoing, 2 new applications ongoing since we started writing the paper.
Thank you. Councillor Dyer, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. It's not very clear in the recommendations or the report. Are we planning on disestablishing the current funds we have or just reallocating some of the money from that fund into this new fund?
I suppose they could be. We would be looking for some direction on that to some degree, and we would be reporting back in November with the criteria that we develop. But I think it would be reformulated to some degree, certainly, to make it more equitable, to include more support for sites and areas of cultural significance.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to add a clarification to that, this proposal is based on the premise that the current settings and incentives would be disestablished in favour of the new settings. There would be scope through workshopping with elected members to settle on the exact criteria and, for example, what that looks like, but it is a replacement of the current settings in place in favour of new ones.
Yeah, that's the impression I got from the workshop, but the recommendation doesn't say that, so it probably does need to be tidied up to be really clear.
If I could just point your attention to recommendation 4A, that in November, officers will seek agreement to discontinue the Heritage Grant Fund and the rates remission mechanism for historic heritage. Those are the current ones.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then I guess my next question is, getting a resource consent is, I'm going to speak pretty simply here, but getting a resource consent means you're doing something to your heritage property that we don't really want you to do. And the idea was that, yep, we're adding 50 to 60 new houses to the district plan, draft district plan, which will mean now you need to get a resource consent to do some things. So we want to help you out there, but not at the expense of not helping house owners repair or paint or improve their heritage buildings. They're two quite different things. One, yeah, that's why I was curious whether we're going to keep the one that I think is actually more important than the resource consent one. But at the same time, as we're adding to the list, there was definitely lots of questions about what's this going to mean for resource consents if I want to put an addition. So yeah, I'm a bit concerned that we'd be getting rid of the current heritage. I know they've been underspent, but they've also been pretty poorly advertised to people previously. But yeah, I guess this will come to us in November to make an actual decision about, but just flagging, I think actually protecting the heritage we've got is more important than getting rid of it, which is what a resource consent would be doing to some degree.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just in reflection of that, I think some of those comments go to the heart of the criteria and the establishment of the new settings as well, which will be workshopped and agreed with elected members. So take those comments on board and we'll work through those in the coming months.
Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you. Did we ask for feedback from those who have used this fund before on what they feel, you know, how the fund could better help them retain heritage?
Not so far, but in the process of developing the criteria, that would be our plan to interact with stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify paragraph 8A. It says the rules of the district plan would permit demolition. Is that correct or is that a typo? I've paraphrased it a bit, but the rules of the district plan would permit a list of things and the last one is demolition. But then 4B says requires resource consent for demolition, or is that demolition talking about the alterations or demolition of the addition?
We might be looking at different versions of paragraph 8, the version that I have in front of me.
Have you found it there, Nathan? I can read it out to you
Oh,
otherwise.
so my reading of 8A is that the rules of the draft plan would permit maintenance and repair of buildings, but where it talks about demolition.
Oh, so just...
I see. I understand that. That is an error. It's not, there wouldn't be the draft district plan wouldn't permit demolition of heritage buildings. There would be internal parts of buildings could be demolished without requiring resource consent, but not the entire building. No, there's an error.
Thank you for that clarification.
And then on B, where it talks about demolition and relocation, obviously one of the excluding factors we're talking about is if you're getting a resource consent to demolish, you won't be able to use this fund. I think it should also include relocation. If you're getting a resource consent to move the heritage building out of our city, why would we want to fund that? Noting we'll have workshops to talk about the criteria.
If I can just make one comment to that, it's that for the most part, relocation of a heritage building is relocating the building off the site. So you're correct, you do lose some of that heritage value, but there are situations where heritage building may need to be relocated within a site. Sometimes that's to address something like natural hazard risk. So there may be circumstances where, again, this would be fleshed out through the criteria, you would want to cover the costs of the resource consent process for that consent, if it's for those sorts of qualifying circumstances like managing natural hazard risk.
Are there any further questions? No, in that case, I will move the recommendations on page 56 and 57. Again, there's quite a lot of them and I won't read them out in full. However, mawai e tōtoko, do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Edwards, thank you very much. Is there any debate? Councillor Edwards.
I'm seconding it because I see the worth in there being this trial and the officers reporting back to us on how it might work. But as I said in the workshop, for me, waiving resource consent fees is the very minimum we should be doing. Because with these heritage buildings as they relate to private property, it's essentially the community saying, we really like your building, it's heritage, you preserve it at your own cost because the community enjoys it. And so when there are resource consent fees involved in some alteration they need to do to the want to do to the outside that are extra and unavoidable from what they might want to do as an ordinary building owner, I think the community should be paying for that resource consent fee. But on top of that, and I'm agreeing here with Councillor Dyer, I believe there should also be a fund to help owners of these properties that we all treasure to look after them and help pay for some of the materials involved in their upkeep. So let's have this trial, but and hear back from officers in November about how it might work. But I'm signalling right now that I think this is a financial issue that this council has to get to grips with, because in the face of considerable opposition when we were formulating the draft district plan, we insisted, and the legislation requires us to, the regional policy statement, national legislation requires us not to make it voluntary, but there are some people who feel very strongly about that, making it compulsory, and I have some sympathy with them.
Is there any further comment? Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, I've already made a few comments during questionable questions. Yeah, I've got the exact same views as Councillor Edwards. I think if the public is protecting private property for public good, the public should pay some element of that cost. I do worry if we're going to disestablish the Heritage Grant Fund while we do this trial. At the end of that trial, it's going to be quite hard to make a final decision if we haven't been running it for a year, noting it's been running for a while, but it hasn't really been actively pushed. We've done some really great stuff on Jackson Street with building owners there, and they look amazing, and that was a tiny amount of money that went into them. Yeah, even looking at the cost of how much we have spent through this fund, it's not a lot of money. Maybe there needs to be better criteria around, I know some other councils have, like the bit we are helping pay for needs to be accessible from the public street. You have to be able to see the front of the building. We won't help with renovations at the back, but the front facade, the council will help contribute towards. So I think the new grant is good for the new people that are being added, but the people that have a heritage home already, that love their heritage home, that don't want to change it and don't need a resource consent, will now be getting zero financial support to keep their building as it is. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. So noting we're also financially strained, we kind of have to choose one or the other, but I think going forward we need to see if there's a way we can actually keep both going. And if there's some magic way, looking at Jenny, that we can keep this one going during the trial to kind of get a bit more of a fair indication about what outcomes we got at the end of the trial would be useful. But yeah, I'm very similar views to Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. Councillor Stallinger has his hand up also, and we'll come back to you, Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Yes, thank you. Just confirming my views align with Councillors Dyer and Edwards as well. Thank them both for their contribution.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Well, thank you. Yes, while living in a heritage street, I can really support what fellow councillors have said about, you know, we live in these houses, the street, we try to make the street look good as a group, collective, and everyone does a lot of it on their own. I've never ever approached council for any funding to do anything to my house, and I'm whipping myself now. Yeah, I'm doing all this. But I really think we do need to keep money in there, because once these houses have gone, they've gone forever. Also, having that resource consent, help with that is valuable. I've seen resource consents go through for things in our street, and then next thing I know, they're putting up aluminium and plastic windows, and that's with a resource consent. And I just don't know what's going on. So I think in-house we need to keep tight on our heritage. If we're going to look after it, we have to do it right. So having this next phase would be valuable to go through and see what everyone else thinks, and to have some more input from the people, as I said, who have utilised the fund before, and what would be the best to help them retain the heritage for the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Lewis. Yeah, I think officers have heard plenty to think about between now and November, and a key part of it, I think, is getting that stakeholder input about what kind of support is the most valuable to them. We quite often hear some different views on that, so getting a really clear picture of what's going to help those property owners, as well as preserving the heritage for the city. So thank you very much for that. The motion has been moved and seconded, so I'll now put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Ka whakapua ki au, kua mana te mōtini. I declare the motion carried. Our next agenda item is an information item. It's the forward program for the committee. It's on page 62, I think, of your agendas. Just to note a change in the table on page 63, which is the Urban Plus and Seaview Marina Limited 6-month reports. Those are due before the committee on the 19th of November 2024, so they'll be coming back before the end of this year. It indicates they're 2025. He pātai tō ngā mema. Does any member have a question, Deputy Mayor Lewis?
Thank you. Just in regard to two pending policies that or bylaws we've got here on our paper, in regard to illegal street racing and speed management bylaw, just want to know where we're at with the government and what they're doing and how it would affect us, if we can have some officer feedback.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So there's a speed review that's going to infrastructure and regulatory, or officers' recommendations coming through on Thursday, and then the minister will make any decisions on speed changes within the next couple of months. So as far as I'm unable to comment on the illegal street racing stuff, but what I will say is that it has got quite clear that things like speed bumps and things like that are not part of the current government's funding priorities. So in order to do traffic calming and make our streets and neighbourhoods safer, we're going to have to look at other options. So.
Thank you, John. Were there any other questions to do with the work programme? No, in which case I will move that the committee receives and notes the draft forward programme for 2024 attached as Appendix 1 to the memorandum. Mā wai e tautoko. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Dyer. I will now put the motion which has been moved and second. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Ka whakapuaki au kua mana te mōtini. I declare the motion carried. Item number 11 is questions. I have received no questions. And now we move to exclusion of the public. I move the motion that the public be excluded from the following parts of the proceedings, namely the rates remission application. Mā wai e tautoko. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lewis. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against, say no. Ka whakapuaki au kua mana te mōtini. I declare the motion carried. I declare the public part of the meeting closed at, where are we? 2:53 p.m. And we're just going to take a 1 minute break to